Hi, You Can Heal family. We made it. We made it out of Numbers, and we are starting the book of Deuteronomy. So I just got off the video about what does the Bible say about friendship, and I'm just still parked in my chair here. So we're going to take a look at the introduction to Deuteronomy, so we have some background here and we know what's going on. Before we dive right into the chapter. So today we're going to read the 5th book of Moses, is what it says here in the Open Bible, called Deuteronomy. The 5th book of Moses called Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, Moses' Upper Desert Discourse, consists of a series of farewell messages by Israel's 120-year-old leader. Okay, so Moses was 120 writing this. It is addressed to the new generation destined to possess the land of promise. Okay, so this book is written to the new generation. Those who survived the 40 years of wilderness wandering. Like Leviticus, Deuteronomy contains a vast amount of legal detail, but its emphasis is on the layman rather than the priest. Moses reminds the new generation of the importance of obedience if they are to learn from the sad example of their parents. The Hebrew title of Deuteronomy is Hadeb Harim, the words taken from the opening phrase in chapter 1, verse 1. This book records the words, the parting words of Moses to the new generation are given in oral and written form so that they will endure to all generations. Deuteronomy has been called the 5/5 of the law since it completes the 5 books of Moses. The Jewish people have also called it Meshne Hatorah, repetition of the law, which is translated in the Septuagint as the Deuteronomion Ta'uto, this second law. Deuteronomy, however, is not a second law, but an adaptation and expansion of much of the original law given on Mount Sinai. The English title comes from the Greek title Deuteronomion, second law. Deuteronomy has also been appropriately called the Book of Remembrance. Wow. Okay, the author of Deuteronomy. The Mosaic authorship of Deuteronomy has been vigorously attacked by critics who claim that Moses is only the originator of the tradition of which these laws are based. Some critics grant that part of Deuteronomy may have come from Mosaic times through oral tradition. The usual argument is that it was anonymously written not long before 621 BC and used by King Josiah to bring about his reform in that year. There are several reasons why these arguments are not valid. External evidence. The Old Testament attributes Deuteronomy and the rest of the Pentateuch to Moses. Evidence from Joshua and 1 Samuel indicates that these laws existed in the form of codified written statutes and exerted an influence on the Israelites in Canaan. Christ quotes it as God's word in turning back Satan's 3 temptations in Matthew 4, 7, and 10. And attributes it directly to Moses. Deuteronomy is cited more than 80 times in 17 of the 27 New Testament books. These citations support the Mosaic authorship. Jewish and Samaritan traditions point to Moses. Now it says the internal evidence. Deuteronomy includes about 40 claims that Moses wrote it. Deuteronomy fits the time of Moses, not Josiah. Canaan is viewed from the outside. The Canaanite religion is seen as a future menace. It assumes the hearers remember Egypt and the wilderness. Israel is described as living in tents, and there is no evidence of a divided kingdom. 3. A serious problem of misrepresentation and literary forgery would arise if this book were written in the 70th century. Geographical and historical details indicate a first-hand knowledge. Deuteronomy follows the treaty form used in the 15th of the 14th centuries. Moses' obituary in chapter 34 was probably written by Joshua. Let me get some water. Okay. The next section is the time of Deuteronomy. Like Leviticus, Deuteronomy does not progress historically. It takes place entirely on the plains of Moab, due east of Jericho and the Jordan River. It covers about 1 month. Okay, so that's interesting. Deuteronomy covers 1 month. Combine Deuteronomy 1:3 and 34:8 with Joshua 5:6 through 12. The book was written at the end of the 40-year period in the wilderness, when the new generation was on the verge of entering Canaan. Moses wrote it to encourage the people to believe and obey God in order to receive God's blessings. Wow, it's interesting. Very interesting. The next section is the Christ of Deuteronomy. The most obvious portrait of Christ is found in 18:15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your fellow Israelites, and you must listen to that prophet. Moses is a type of Christ in many ways, as he is the only biblical figure other than Christ to fill the 3 offices of prophet, priest, and king. Although Moses was not king, he functioned as ruler of Israel in chapter 34, 4 through 5. Both are in danger of death during childhood. Both are saviors. Okay, this is saying Christ and Moses, were both in danger of death during childhood. Both are saviors, intercessors, and believers, and both are rejected by their brethren. Moses is one of the greatest men who ever lived, combining not just 1 or 2 memorable virtues, but many. Well, that's interesting. It's real good. All right, the keys to Deuteronomy. So there's a key word, a key verse, and a key chapter. So the key word is covenant. The primary theme of the entire book of Deuteronomy is the renewal of the covenant. Originally established at Mount Sinai, the covenant is enlarged and renewed on the plains of Moab. The key verses of Deuteronomy are chapter 10, 12 through 13, and chapter 30, 19 through 20. And it says, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? He requires you to fear him, to live according to his will, to love and worship him with all your heart and soul, and to obey the Lord's commands and laws that I am giving you today for your own good. Today I have given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and curses. I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice you make. Oh, that you would choose life, that you and your descendants might live. Choose to love the Lord your God and to obey him and commit yourself to him, for he is your life. Then you will live long in the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Oh, how good is that? Choose life, you can help family. Choose to live for the Lord. I love it. All right, let me get some water. My goodness. Key chapter, Deuteronomy 27. The formal ratification of the covenant occurs in Deuteronomy 27 as Moses and the Levitical priests declare, "O Israel, be quiet and listen. Today you have become the people of the Lord your God." So the key chapter is 27. The next section here is the survey of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, in its broadest outline, is the record of the renewal of the Old Covenant given at Mount Sinai. This covenant is reviewed, expanded, enlarged, and finally ratified in the plains of Moab. Moses accomplishes this primarily through 3 sermons that move from a retrospective to an introspective, and finally to a perspective look at God's dealings with Israel. Moses' first sermon was chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 and 43. Moses reaches into the past to remind the people of 2 undeniable facts to their history. Number 1, the moral judgment of God upon Israel's unbelief, and 2, the deliverance and provision of God during times of obedience. The simple lesson is that obedience brings blessings and disobedience brings punishment. Oh, that's so true. Even just thinking about growing up as a kid, like when you listened to your parents, things were pretty good. When you didn't, the belt was coming out. Oh my goodness. All right, and then it says Moses' second sermon was in chapter 4, verses 44 and 26 in chapter 19. This moral and legal section is the longest in the book because Israel's future as a nation in Canaan will depend upon a right relationship with God. These chapters review the 3 categories of the law. The testimonies, these are the moral duties, arrestment and expansion of the 10 Commandments, plus an exhortation not to forget God's gracious deliverance. The statutes, these are the ceremonial duties, sacrifices, tithes, and feast. And 3, the ordinances. These are the civil and social duties, the system of justice, criminal laws, laws of warfare, rules of property, personal and family morality, and social justice. Moses' third sermon was chapters 27 through 34. So this is how the book is broken down then. In these chapters, Moses writes history in advance. He predicts what will befall Israel in the near future, blessings and cursings, and in the distant future, dispersion among the nations and eventual return. Moses lists the terms of the covenant soon to be ratified by the people. Because Moses will not be allowed to enter the land, he appoints Joshua as his successor and delivers a farewell address to the multitude. God himself buries Moses in an unknown place, perhaps to prevent idolatry. Moses finally enters the promised land when he appears with Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration. And that's in Matthew 17:3. The last 3 verses of the Pentateuch are an appropriate epitaph for this great man. I want to go to Matthew 17:3 and read it. Inquiring minds want to know, right? Oh my goodness. Okay, Matthew 17:3, when Moses reappears with the transfiguration. How cool is that? It says here, suddenly Moses and Elijah appear and begin talking with Jesus. So if you go back to verse 1, it says, the title of chapter 17, the beginning is the Transfiguration. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and the 2 brothers, James and John, and led them up a high mountain. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance changed so that his face shone like the sun and his clothing became dazzling white. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter blurted out, "Lord, this is wonderful. If you want me to, I'll make 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But even as he said it, a bright cloud came over them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, and I am fully pleased with him. Listen to him." The disciples were terrified and fell face down on the ground. Jesus then in verse 7 came over and touched them. "Get up," he said, "don't be afraid." And when they looked, they saw only Jesus with them. As they descended on the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until I the Son of Man, have been raised from the dead. Oh, that's so good. Gosh, can you imagine being a Moses and Elijah and praying with Jesus at the Transfiguration? That is pretty amazing, and that's pretty special. Okay, so we know then that Deuteronomy was written over a month's time, and it's pretty much setting the stage for the descendants that were going to enter the promised land to come in. So I'm excited. I'm excited for Deuteronomy. So here we go. Here we go, You Can Heal Family. Thanks for listening to the introduction and sticking with me to get that good background. So so what will it be? On Wednesday, we'll start chapter 1 of Deuteronomy. It looks like there's 34 chapters. I'm going to read every single word. I hope you're excited. Always remember, true healing begins with self-love. Why? Because God is love, and He lives on the inside of you. We'll talk soon. Love ya. Bye.